Shada is the Managing Director of Protivity. She's a country MD with 22 years of international experience across Big Four consulting and blue chip companies. She focuses on many areas, including people and change, organizational transformation, and cultural mindset shift. She's previously worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, in the USA. She's worked across several countries, and she will be speaking about learning and development in the private sector, trends, challenges, and solutions. Shada is very active on Twitter, so I recommend that you follow her on Twitter and kind of see what she's all about. So Shada, welcome, and over to you.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to be here. Learning and development has been a topic of great interest. Can everyone hear me in the room? Yeah? Okay, so I have one question before I get started. How many students are in this room? Can you put your hands up? Okay. And how many of you are in learning and development? And I'm assuming the rest are in HR? Okay, so we've got engineers. Okay, wonderful. That's good. Learning and development obviously is not limited to HR. Today I will be talking from my experience. So by background, I'm not an HR person actually. I come from the business. Okay, sure. I come from a business background, mainly in risk management and business performance improvement. However, when I returned to Oman about 12 years ago, I noticed that there was a huge gap in the space of people and culture, specifically learning. And if we see the reports over the years, even international reports have suggested that our region spends the most on learning and development, but the knowledge retention is the lowest. Actually, it's not just the lowest, it's at a poverty level. So this obviously raises a lot of concerns. What are we doing in learning and development? What sort of investments are we making? Are we making the right investments? And how are we going about to actually retain this knowledge? So we'll just go to the next slide, please. So just a quick introduction on L&D. I know there's some terminologies that are very commonly used here in Oman, and I wanted to share the good and the criticisms of those models. And then we'll talk about the trends. And the trends in terms of what are employers doing, what are employees expecting, what are the technologies available. And then I will move on to the future skills and the L&D technologies available. Of course, many of them would be familiar to you, and others maybe not so much. I will share a little bit of a case study on that. And then the way forward, the good practices, and so on. So we'll start with a very brief introduction on L&D. One is, what is the strategic role, the VARC model, and the other models. We can move to the next slide, please. So the strategic role, of course, many know that it's about developing people's capabilities. However, and when we talk about motivating and engaging employees, I think there's two sides to that. Are we motivating them as a reward, or are we motivating them to actually upskill them or to reskill them, to actually make them more productive? Because when people are more productive, they perform better, they get better appraisals, they get promotions, and they get rewards. Or are we motivating them because they get along with the management, and you just want to make them happy and say, hey, I'm going to send you to Dubai, or I'm going to send you to Singapore for a program that's probably not relevant, but it's a treat. So this is where I've seen there's been a bit of an issue there, where I've not seen there's any alignment between what are the actual needs of this individual, how does it map to the organization's strategic objectives, and how will it be actually adopted on the job. So what we're talking about now, sorry, please go back to the other slide. The other 3 points which I think fails very often, one is attracting and retaining talent. Today, if you hire people, and I can say this even for myself, I've hired people for even maybe lower than the job market pay, and the only offer I have is that they're going to get a learning opportunity. And surprisingly enough, a lot of the fresh graduates are not looking for a good pay without a learning opportunity. And when we talk about learning, obviously it's everyday learning, whether you're learning on the job, whether you're getting formal learning, or whether you're getting online learning, or whether you're getting executive coaching from your supervisors. The other thing is there's also organizations now that have reached out to us and said, listen, we know we're a corporate, we know we have a huge market share, but now we want to become a learning organization because competition is getting stiff. There are other service providers coming into the market and, and competing with them. They might be monstrous in size, but not necessarily intellectually. And so they're saying, please help us out, come in, help us devise a learning strategy. How do we develop different academies within the organization? And of course, I'm talking about maybe the top 10 companies in Oman. Not everyone can afford to make huge investments in this space. And of course, this creates a different culture in the organization when you focus on having a learning strategy and saying that every day is a learning day at the organization. Finally, that's how you really truly create an employer brand, because learning, developing people is the best way you can give something back to society. Because whether they stay with you or if they go anywhere else, you will be proud of them and they are serving the community. Next slide. So of course, human beings are different and their learning styles are different. I just thought I would share a bit of this because I think anybody in the space of learning and development needs to appreciate that people have different learning styles. So when we talk about visuals, some people enjoy seeing things in images, in graphs. That's how they're able to retain knowledge. Then you have others that is auditory, and what that means is what is spoken and what is heard. They like the two-way communication. And they could learn through email, they could learn through WhatsApp, they could learn through anything that is a two-way communication. Then you have the reading and writing. We have people who just want to be in a room alone and do their research. Okay. So people, when it comes to reading and writing, I know a number of people who actually do very well. They like to be in a closed room, do their research, collect data, collect information, crunch that information, and make sense of it. That is their learning format. And then we have the kinesthetic. Kinesthetic is more about simulations. People are like, show me how you do this. I want to be in that space, and I want to actually get my hands on in how to learn this. So just a very simple example. So visual would be like process maps. If anyone is in the business space, you'll understand that I have a new joiner, and he needs to learn how to, perform a task. He wants process maps. Then you have the other person who's more on the on the reading and writing. He's like, no, I want a manual that actually tells me step by step what I need to do in narrative format. Auditory is like, actually, I want to sit next to you, I want to see how you do it, and then I'm going to do it. And kinesthetic obviously is a little bit more, so they enjoy the simulation environment. Next slide, please. Okay, so now with different modes of learning, of course, most of you are familiar with all these. Digital learning has become actually something that everyone is looking at, especially in light of COVID. And I have to say something, it's been 10 years that I have been pushing very hard for learning management systems, e-learning, mobile learning in Oman, and the only response I get, Shada, what works in the US is not going to work in Oman. And I keep telling them that I am an Omani, I worked overseas, I've taken, I've sat on training programs in Oman, in Dubai, in the US, and actually I've learned so much more in the US in much shorter periods of time. So when I talk about e-learning doesn't have to be all day, it doesn't have to be all week. E-learning can be as short as 20 minutes, but it's amazing how much information you could retain in 20 minutes as opposed to 6 hours or a week. The other things, of course, is in-person and virtual workshops. Of course, virtual workshops have become very common now. And again, that's because of COVID. And I remember a few months ago when I said, okay, we really need to talk about how are we going to transform learning strategy in your organization. And they said, no, Shada, COVID is over. We're going to go back to how we used to be. And now we know that there's a new variant. People are again concerned about, okay, how are we going to train people and how are we going to have events like this again? Is it going to go back to virtual? And I really salute Amr for this event because he's made sure that, not complimenting, it's the truth. I know a lot of people who wanted to attend this event, but due to commitments or whatever, they want the flexibility. I want to watch a particular speaker. I want to just, I might have time during my break to watch this. And, Amr has opened that path for anyone today to watch it, not just in Oman. Then you have the individual team assignments, and I think this has been very successful. I call it project-based learning. We did this actually a sector-wide project in Oman. I did not think it would work, so in the span of 7 months, we delivered only 7 workshops, and those 7 workshops were more theoretical. People to understand what change management is, project management is, a little bit about emotional intelligence, a little bit about self-awareness, and also communication and other topics. But really what we did is we told them, identify a real problem in your organization. Today, if you want to learn, I'm not going to do a learning program to tell you what has happened in the US, what has happened in the UK, or even Dubai. Tell us a real problem that you see in your organization that bothers you, you have a solution in mind, and propose it. And it's amazing, we had about, I think, 200 or 300 participants from the entire sector. And I think they're very proud, and I think they'll be okay if I talk about this. It's with Asyad, and the program was called Hisba. So if anyone is familiar with them, look up the word Hisba, Hisba. It was, I think, one of the most successful programs I've ever seen, and it has nothing to do with, Protiviti supported them or anything like that. I really believe it was the method that was used. And so they identified problems, the executive coaching came into play. We came in and said, okay, you guys have great ideas, but you need to really think about it. How is this going to add value? We can't just talk about problems that does not result in true value. Towards the end, people identified new revenue streams. People suggested business process improvement. And what I mean by that is like process re-engineering, standardizing, automating processes. And a very beautiful example I have is that we did not exclude anyone. And I think this is very important in learning, is to stress on inclusion. The secretary of a CEO was one of the winners. Why? She was sitting out at a window every day watching the way the containers are being moved. And she said, this is so inefficient. But طبعاً, who's going to listen to secretary? But she was involved. And what we did is we put a very good mix of people. So we run an assessment. We try to see, okay, are you the type of person who's highly organized? Are you a social person? Are you more leadership driven? We have tools for that. And what we did is we put a mix on the table. You can't have all minds thinking alike on the same table or the same style of working. And she suggested a solution that was brilliant and actually has reduced, I don't have the exact numbers at the top of my head, but we're talking about, she created efficiencies of about 30%. She didn't have to say anything, she just shared her observation. And from there, the team fleshed out everything, proposed it, and the inauguration was by the minister himself. She presented it, and it was like I wouldn't call it a TED style, but a Shark Tank maybe. She had to get on stage, 5 minutes, give her pitch, and even the pitching was very impressive. So I say people can change quite fast. I always hear the same old stories that, no, people are not going to learn very fast. It's going to take a very long time. Oman, we're way behind. It's not true. We need support. People need to be sponsored. And people need to know that if they're going to present a problem and if they're going to present a solution, someone's going to support them to implement it. And this is exactly what Asyad did. So with that long story, of course, other aspects are peer learning teams and expert coaching. We can move to the next slide, please. So a little bit about upskilling and reskilling. I had to mention this because it's always used interchangeably. The difference between upskilling and reskilling, upskilling is you have the skills, we need to enhance them so that you can become more productive. Whereas reskilling is that maybe your job is becoming redundant, we need to teach you new skills for a new role. And this is the reality that we live in today. Next. Okay, so now the 70-20-10 model. How many of you are familiar with this? Anyone? Okay, engineer. Anyone else? Okay, so 70-20-10 is 70% should be on the job, 20% is social learning, or in other organizations we say coaching, and then the 10% is formal training. Now, people think this is scientific and it's prescriptive, and this is how it should be done. But this is, when I did my research, it was actually, I would say it's a great guideline, but it's not scientific. It was done on 200 people, and this is the conclusion that they made. I believe every organization, every industry, even the culture of an organization, the way they learn, can determine the ratio of the 70-20-10. Some argue that 10% is not enough for informal learning. So I have one question. If we say 10%, that's about 180 hours in a year, which equates to about 22 working days. How many of you in this room have had 22 working days of formal training? Anyone? In a year? Some not even 10 days. Maybe they go for a week, maybe a week and a half maximum. So why are we arguing about the 10%? In my opinion, I think it's probably going to be less than 10%. And especially now that we see the effectiveness of instructor-led learnings versus on-the-job, project-based coaching, I would say that that percentage is actually going to grow smaller. We can move to the next slide. Next, please. Okay. So this is what companies are actually exploring, and this is actually even happening in Oman. They are struggling with flexible working, trying to understand how do we offer flexible working or even remote working, flexible hours, all that good stuff. And the struggle comes from one main reason, is that they're not able to, or they're not willing to invest in the infrastructure, especially for remote working. Others, taban, it's related to security issues. We have upskilling and reskilling, We have upskilling and reskilling, which I already talked about, so people are talking about this is actually becoming a hot topic. And they're also making a lot of investments in soft skills. Just because we move to technology does not mean you forget the softer elements of learning, of people, of human beings. When you want to move into the space of digital, you need to have that level of emotional intelligence. You need to understand how to communicate with others. You need to understand what they need. What are their needs? What are they expecting? That ability is very important. And of course, when you want to launch something, you need to communicate the benefits. People need to know what's in it for them. We hear a lot that everybody is resisting any kind of change. When it comes to technology, people get even overwhelmed. It's like, oh, I don't have the skills. How am I going to be capable of doing this? So leadership is obviously one of the soft skills, communication and so on. Learning strategy. Now, people used to always have HR strategy. People are now focusing on learning strategy. And of course, there is an increased use of tech. And the reason why I say this again is Oman got pushed by COVID. It was not pushed by anything else. And now when a variant comes up, I'm not going to say I'm happy about it, but sometimes I'm like, yes. So that people can understand this is not something you can let go. And we're talking about, right now they're more focused on online training. A lot are asking about augmented reality and virtual reality, but unfortunately we're still not in a space where it's affordable. And I can give a very simple example. One client asked for training in virtual reality. We found a partner, but for one program, it costs about 25,000 riyals for about 75 people. And so they said, we don't know if it's worth the investment. Well, I said, you can use it on repeat basis. They said, yeah, but we still need to go back and update the content, which is also going to cost money. So that's still something that people are looking into. And then, of course, business games and simulations. Let me tell you about business game and simulations. This is probably one of the most effective ways of learning. During COVID, in our organization, anybody who was sitting idle, we invested in soft skills. It's an online platform for learning. And I think they did not know about this, but I told my staff that, listen, guys, when you're sitting idle, I want you to go in. You can put, your profile in, what is it that you do in the space of consulting, and then it will suggest training programs for you. And of course, the training programs were fun because they were all about 20, 30 minutes long. So it's like, yes, there's a sense of achievement. I did 1, 2, 3. And to my surprise, I did not know that there was actually a gamification happening in the background, and I'm glad that they did not know. On the chairman's event, he actually mentioned that the top 2 were Omani women in the region, because I know now that when they sit idle, they're actually making time to learn, and they get badges. So for every program that you complete, you get a badge. And so they had the highest number of badges. And now everybody in the organization, I was happy because I had no idea what it was, and I said, hey girls, like what were you doing? What were you competing? What was it? How did you get those badges? And they said, oh, there was no work, things were slow, we were sitting at home, and you suggested that we do some learning. So we just sat there and did some courses that were relevant to what they do. So yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so what learners are expecting now, I think this is all very familiar to all of us. People expect it to be personalized. And when we say personalized, personalized to you, personalized to your needs, personalized to your role, and so on. And then, of course, when we're talking about the materials, it should be tailored and relevant for you. So I'm not going to sit in a training that is very specific to financial services if I'm in the oil and gas space. Context. People like to have context to anything that they are being trained on. And this is, of course, something that learning and development people need to understand, how they can customize and ensure that the learning retention is maximized. And of course, accessibility. And when we say accessibility, it's 2 things. Accessible anytime, anywhere, on any device. And when we say on any device, it has to be in responsive design. I do see that this is still an issue with some learning platforms where you have to get on a laptop. People want to learn even on their mobile, or they want to learn on their tablet. So we always stress that anything you do today should be in responsive design. Actually, I think I do most of my work on a phone, more so than a laptop unless I'm reviewing reports and so on. All right, next slide. So these are some of the learning technologies which you're all familiar with. So I'm not going to get into details, but this is everyone knows what a podcast is: interactive whiteboards, learning management system, simulation, gamification, mobile learning, virtual reality. My 2 favorites are actually virtual reality and mobile learning. And the reason why is because the knowledge retention is heightened by virtual reality and mobile learning. Why mobile learning? Because you're getting bite-sized education. So when you hear or read something that's 2 or 3 sentences long, and if you read it 5 times, the likeliness of that being retained for a very long time is high. However, today in this workshop or in this session, they say that the chances of you remembering anything that happened here, within 24 hours, most of it will be forgotten. Because based on neuroscience, things have to be repeated at least 5 times or more. And so some organizations, what they do is they just send this brief SMS to remind you. It could be something like the value of a company. Because if you go today and ask people, what are the values of your company? How many of you could remember them all? Anyone? To be honest, I'm not going to ask anyone, but if you can just put your hands up. We all struggle with it. How many people actually remember the values of their company? I don't see any hands up. Which says something, right? You can't have values if it's not communicated, and if it's not communicated on a regular basis, and if it's not demonstrated in action by everybody. We can move to the next slide, please. So here's a very simple, this is a case study. 2 groups of people were trained. One was instructor-led traditional style, and the other one was virtual reality, and these were the actual results. First of all, in terms of impact, it was 1.5 times stronger. 2, the return on investment was 128%. So this was for a sales team. And they said that the sales team actually sold more with the virtual reality training because the amount of knowledge they retained was higher. Business impact, like I mentioned, that the sales were higher. Behavior change, even behaviorally, people changed, that it was visible in their employees. And 97% increased valuable learning, which actually refers to learning retention as opposed to instructor-led training. And finally, they were highly engaged. You can go to the next slide. So these are some of the, I just put 5 in here because otherwise it's not going to be visible. I can barely see the 10 on the screen. So there's the top 20 to, on the left side, the top 20 that have been rated as per Training Industry 2021 on the left, and the ones to watch out for on the right. But I just picked 5. Some of them I'm familiar with. And I can safely say that Skillsoft is brilliant. I don't have any relationship with that organization, except that we have implemented it. It's highly effective if it's something that anyone wants to explore. We also use PECB, again, highly effective, especially in the space of developing technical skills for technology consultants or technology professions. Next slide. Okay, so a little bit about the challenges now. And this is, again, from my personal experience. When we meet L&D, frankly speaking, they don't even know what the business strategy is. So what role are you playing if you're going to strategize the learning for the organization? Or what are you going to be doing to actually transform this organization into a learning organization? What are you going to be doing? I mean, L&D is not a role to be undermined. They actually even play a huge role in attracting talent, retaining talent. If you're going to give bad training, or not give good training, the younger generation are not willing to stick around because they know the better they're trained, the higher their value in the market will be. The other thing is maintaining skills with limited resources. I mean, we know that there's been budget cuts, and surprisingly, the budget cuts even hurt the training budget. The other thing is, making training accessible without interrupting daily operations, and I get this a lot. The staff say, L&D will inform us a week before or 2 weeks before, block your calendar, for 3-4 days, because we're going to be delivering this program, which obviously interrupts their business. Surprisingly, a lot of people actually decide either not to be present in those trainings or to show up half a day and so on, and obviously that just defeats the whole purpose. There's something wrong with the screen? Okay. The other thing is obviously measuring the return on investment. I ask a lot of organizations, great, you've spent $1 million, you've spent $1.5 million. How are you measuring the return on investment? And unfortunately, the only thing I get is, oh, we asked for the level of satisfaction. And I think many of them, because they know they're being tracked, they just say 9, 10, 9, 10, highly satisfied. But nobody really gives constructive feedback. When you walk down the aisles and talk to them and ask them, how was this trainings? They're like, didn't learn anything, but the lunch was good. Can you please go back to the previous slide? The previous one, yeah. So the other thing is, of course, with new hires, that's another complaint we get, is that they're hiring new employees, but there's a huge skills gap. And some organizations are investing as much as 6 months in the first year to develop new hires. And so again, in my opinion, trying to invest in technologies would be very useful. I know one particular bank that actually loses the new hires within the first year because the training is excellent, but they're already moving on to other organizations because khalas, they're ready now to join the banking industry. So many join 1 or 2 specific banks. I can't mention their names, but maybe you can guess who they are because they do invest a lot of money in learning. And of course, finally, is that when you are delivering a training, there has to be forward thinking. I'm not going to just try and address an issue today, a pressing issue today. We need to be forward thinking. Next slide.
Shata, we request you to wrap it up quickly so
Okay.
we can move on. Thank you so much.
Okay, sure. So, some of the challenges that are happening just because of the growing technologies in the market, we can see that there's a lot of organizations are restructuring, they're introducing new roles, and then they're pushing for automation, which leads to digital transformation. And, also in the whole process, there's budget cuts. You can move to the next slide so I can... Next, yeah. So this is another thing, sorry, just before that. Yeah, so this is also leading to, you can just quickly look at the screen. I think I've covered most of it, but The problem is, because of all those changes, organizational change, digital transformation, automation, obviously is creating new roles and is overwhelming the learning and development community as well as the employees. Next. Next. So when it comes to L&D, and I'm not going to get into the details, L&D needs to understand what are the human needs. What are the universal essential skills that we have? People want to feel more than just an employee. They want to feel that there is something that they are contributing. They want to be more self-aware. They want to feel that they've got this professional resilience. If we move to the next slide, we can see that the universal framework for essential skills, again, is all on the soft skills. Nobody's talking about the technical skills. Technical skills are there, but there's a lot of stress on the soft skills. Next slide. So I've just crossed out soft skills because there's so much that has been talked about it, but when it comes to tactical skills and technical skills, these are some of the top skills that is expected from employees today. I won't get into too much details because I think a lot has been mentioned by other speakers. Next slide. I've just done a little bit of mapping, so based on World Economic Forum, the future skills, as well as Oman Vision 2040. Again, there is some matching. The ones in brown or orange, the soft skills, and then the hard skills or the technical skills are in green, just so that you can see that there is some alignment. Next slide. So solutions and way forward. Can you just move? You can move so that we can wrap this up, please. Next slide. Yeah, so what everyone needs to do, especially in the L&D space, one is to identify the gaps. Start using smart technology for all levels in the organizations. And when I say all levels, right from ground zero up to CEO level. They can also sit behind a screen, spend 20 minutes and learn something new. Focus on connectivity and engagement. Enhance the training through different learning methods. As we mentioned earlier, people learn differently. It's good to understand what are their preferences and then deliver something that is aligned to their needs. طبعاً tailoring the training contents. And then also creating a learning environment that is constantly encouraging reskilling as well as upskilling. And we say that you can't retain knowledge unless it's repeated. So repetition is key. Next. These are some of the leading practices. Again, I'm not going to get into the details because we've run out of time, but I've stressed about learning strategy. We should be discussing our priorities in terms of learning all the time, understand what are the learning trends, understand what are the latest technologies available, provide mobile learning. I think mobile learning is brilliant for, especially in our community where we're overwhelmed lately, we work long hours. طبعاً going digital, responsive design, I already talked about that, bite-sized content, which they call also micro-learning. Creating also a very good user experience. You can have the best technologies, but if the user experience is frustrating, it's not going to be effective. And the last one is train the trainer. Everybody should be able to train somebody else. And we do this in our organization all the time. I have a new joiner, he's attending a 4-day program on business continuity, and I told him, I don't need to take the whole team to do this training. I want you to get certified, and I want you to deliver this training immediately after you've completed the training. So this is another way to get people to retain knowledge, because you can send them to great training programs, but if you don't make them come back and share the learnings with their colleagues, obviously they're not going to be paying attention like they usually would. And I think we're coming to an end. Is that? This, I think many of you have seen this quote. So when people start talking about, oh, we don't want to spend money training this person, and then what if they leave? I say, be more concerned about not training them, and they stay with you in the organization. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ada.